So thank you so much for inviting me to present to you today. I've been up since 7 a.m. listening to all the wonderful presentations. So my chance today is to talk to you about what we as the public can do around the infodemic. So my name is Claire Wardle. I'm the US Director of FirstDraft, and we're a non-profit that helps newsrooms, but also the public more generally, tackle these challenges of misinformation. So I thought I would start by talking about some global misinformation trends when it comes to misinformation, particularly around COVID. So at FirstDraft, we've been monitoring misinformation for about 5 years, and I've never seen a story like COVID where we were seeing the same rumors at the same time across borders. And this was something that we've never seen anything to the scale that we've seen with COVID. So I wanted to talk about 5 of the biggest trends that have been worrying me. So this will not surprise you if you live anywhere else outside United States of America or Western Europe, because we've done work in Brazil, in India and Nigeria, and you guys already know this, but WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger and Viber and Line, all of these types of spaces have been problems for misinformation. And certainly COVID has brought those problems to the United States of America and Western Europe. And so seeing these spaces as really important vectors for misinformation and conspiracies is a real challenge for those of us who are trying to counter it. Because they are encrypted, it makes it impossible for us to monitor these spaces and be quick enough to debunk those spaces. Secondly, imposter content continues to be a very effective tactic. So as humans, unfortunately, our brains really struggle to make sense of information when we're overwhelmed. And this infodemic means we're really struggling to keep on top of all the information. So heuristics is what we're looking for, these mental cues that help us make sense of information. And logos of organizations that we already trust are much more effective. So here's a Twitter account that's suggesting that Prime Minister Boris Johnson had died when he was in hospital with COVID. On the right-hand side is a flyer that was put through letterboxes in Los Angeles using the World Health Organization logo, CDC. Very, very cheap, very, very effective techniques for sharing misinformation. Thirdly, and this is critical, misinformation and hate speech continue to intersect. People are taking advantage of existing racial divisions and xenophobia, and we can't see these as separate things. We have to understand how misinformation is taking advantage of the divisions that already exist. And so I just wanted to stress that. Number 4, visual and mimetic and video content is getting much more prevalent and influential, but much more difficult to monitor and track. So spaces like TikTok or videos like Plandemic that Dr. Nabarro talked about this morning. Look at that, it looks like a Netflix produced documentary. This is again a heuristic. As humans, we see something that looks slick and professionally produced, we are more likely to trust it. But unfortunately, those of us who are researchers, journalists, fact checkers, we like to think in text. We have computer programs that make sense of text. Text is much easier to research. But actually, if we are really serious about tackling the infodemic, we need to get much, much better at being able to monitor and make sense of visuals in real time. And number 5, and this is the thing that I worry deeply about. So conspiracy theories have been with us for a long time. And Dr. Nabarro did a great job of talking about why people are right now very susceptible to conspiracies. They're looking for solutions. But conspiracies have always been on the fringe. We would monitor them at FirstDraft and we would watch them, but we'd say, this isn't important enough to necessarily report on or debunk because these are fringe beliefs. In the last 4 months, we've seen these fringe beliefs move into the mainstream in a really worrying way because it's having real world harm. So let's just take the example of the conspiracy that 5G telephone masts are spreading COVID-19. On the left-hand side, surprise, surprise, lots of Facebook groups, some private, some public, lots of spaces where this is being spread. But now we're seeing graffiti on the streets. We're seeing telephone masts being burnt down. We're seeing telecoms engineers being harassed on the street. The shift from conspiracy fringe spaces to real world harm is really getting much, much quicker and really concerning. So there are many ways that we could talk about interventions, and I'm sure in the next 12 days, there's a conference that would talk about many of those things. I want to focus on the role of the public, because the last 4 years, as there's been many conversations about misinformation, people have said, well, what can the platforms do? Surely Facebook can tweak its algorithm. Surely we need more government regulation. And when we talk about kind of media literacy or information literacy, people say, oh, Claire, that will take too long. But hearing Harry talk from Mafindo, it's a reminder that this is absolutely the key to this. It's going to take us a very long time to get through this. I really believe that we will get through this, but it might take 20 to 30 years to change the culture around sharing misinformation. It needs to be embarrassing to share misinformation. It needs to be like drink driving, but it starts by us having conversations with each other. So that's what I want to spend the second part of my presentation on. So this is a very recent study from a few days ago saying study suggests tweaks mocking 5G conspiracy theory about COVID-19 may have inadvertently popularized it. And this is the key. We cannot use derogatory language around people who believe conspiracy theories or misinformation. And by simply talking about it, by mocking it in the press, by saying, who are these people? We're actually giving the conspiracy more oxygen. And we're making the people who believe this less trusting of the news media, less trusting of fact-checking organizations, and less trusting of family members who are shaming them in terms of what they believe. So this is critical for us thinking about interventions. And this is exactly to the point from this morning. We need to understand why people believe misinformation and conspiracies. This is a piece actually written by one of my very good friends. We went to graduate school together. And when we were in graduate school together, her husband, pictured here, died very suddenly of a brain tumor. And she was 33, she had a 6-month-old baby, and she desperately wanted an explanation for why this had happened to her family. So she wrote this very honest piece called I Was a Conspiracy Theorist Too. And I would really recommend it because we have to understand why people right now are susceptible. And the truth is, we do not have an origin story for this virus. We do not yet have a cure or treatment for this virus. We have disagreement about whether we should be wearing masks inside meeting rooms. And so in these vacuums is why misinformation and conspiracy is spreading. But we have to understand that in this moment, people feel completely powerless. Their lives have been turned upside down. They might have lost their jobs. They're suddenly under incredible stress and they're looking for self-efficacy. And by being able to share a conspiracy, which is giving them an answer, it gives them that self-efficacy. Because remember, conspiracies are effective because they are simple, powerful stories, and we are humans. And this is critical. It is too easy to think that as humans, we have a rational relationship to information. We do not, all of us. Doesn't matter whether you've got a PhD, it doesn't matter what you do for a job, it doesn't matter where you live. All of us are humans, and therefore all of us are susceptible to misinformation because we have an emotional relationship to information. So if somebody shares information that reinforces our beliefs, we are much more likely to take that information on without being critical. Doesn't matter how much media literacy training you've had, which is why we need to think about the emotional reactions we have when we consume a piece of information. Does it make us angry, sad, fearful? Does it make us want to make an impulse purchase? That's what we need to talk about. That's the secret to how we get through this. And I'd also argue that we have to follow best practices when we talk about misinformation. Saad was right. There is, it's a small and emerging field around misinformation based on social behavioral science. But we do know things like how should you word headlines? Saying this, is 5G going to kill us all? A new generation of super fast wireless internet is coming soon, but no one can say for sure if it's safe. Disastrous. Absolutely no space for headlines that are leaving us with a question mark like that. We have to be certain about what we're certain about, and we have to be clear when there is uncertainty, but we can't put the uncertainty in the headline because we live in a world where many people only see the headlines, only see the image in Twitter or Instagram or WhatsApp. So we have to be very careful about how we word this. And I would say this to my WHO friends. This is great. This is an ad at the top of Google. Yesterday I Googled 5G COVID, but it's a question. Do 5G mobile networks spread COVID-19? I have to click through to get to that answer. And unfortunately, this allows people to screenshot this, share it and say, look, even the WHO doesn't know. So we have to be very careful about how we do this work. And this is another example from a good website, but we see many websites falling into this mistake. Look at what's bold and in a larger font. It's the myths. So all of the research about how we talk about misinformation needs to flip this. We should not put more emphasis on the falsity. We should lead with the facts. So we shouldn't say 5 myths about coronavirus and list the myths, because all the research says if I go back to somebody a week later, they will only remember the myths. They will not remember that they are myths. They will see them as facts. So again, these small things are really important in terms of how we do the work that we do. And this, I think, is really exciting, is that this is work that has come out from researchers in Australia that takes inoculation theory from the 1960s and applies it to this moment of misinformation, which is this idea of maybe giving people a little shot of the misinformation. But actually, it's about giving people a shot to help them understand the tactics and techniques. And that's what's critical here. The more you talk to people about who shares this kind of, or who creates this misinformation and who shares it and why, people are actually much better at then understanding when they see misinformation at a later date. So this is, I think, a critical piece of the study that I just referenced. They said, I found that explaining the misinformation technique completely neutralized the misinformation's influence without even mentioning the misinformation specifically, because that's the challenge. How do we debunk without giving more oxygen to the false information at the beginning? And so in this example, it was about climate science, and it was explaining that bad actors will use fake experts. So then when they saw the piece of misinformation that used fake expert, they were much better equipped at recognizing it as such. And he concludes, whether you're conservative or liberal, no one wants to be deceived by misleading techniques. So the more we try and debunk the content, yes, there is space to do that, but actually, can we spend more time teaching people about, as Camille Francois talks about, the actors and behaviors, not just the content. So she talks about the ABCs, actors and behaviors. Let's spend more time educating people about that. So here's an example from Anchorage Daily News from Alaska, but their headline reads, major funder of anti-vaccine movement makes millions selling natural health products. Saad talked about using alternative explanations. If you tell somebody that it's false, they're like, okay, and a hole opens up in their brain. But if you don't give them an explanation for why it's false, the brain goes back to remembering the falsity. But if you give them the explanation that says, oh, this person is peddling anti-vax beliefs, surprise, surprise, they're making a lot of money from from vaccine supplements or health supplements, you're providing that explanation to the person. So we need to be better at focusing on those pushing falsehoods and explaining their motivations. So there are 3 main reasons why people create or share this content. Firstly, to make money. It's about tricking people into clicking on false sites or seeing more ads or donating to false GoFundMe accounts. I mean, talking to people about that, they understand a scam. This is not new. Secondly, talking about political gain. Is this creating a smear campaign? Is it about an election? Is it domestic or foreign interference in an election? People understand that. But thirdly, social or psychological reasons. The information that all of us share is tied to our identity. So every day when I decide what to share on social media, I'm thinking, who do I think is going to see this? And is it making me look smart, clever, interesting, connected to people who like dogs or this particular candidate? All of us make those decisions all the time. And so we have to explain that often when people are sharing this, it's because it's tied to an identity that they're trying to construct. But there's also psychological reasons, is that some hoaxers just do it to see if they can get away with it. And that's hard to explain. But if you say to people, there's really no explanation other than some people just kind of being hoaxers. They're just seeing if they can get away with it. So we need to talk to people about these different motivations. And as I said, we need to be better at explaining tactics and techniques. This is the 7 types, a framework that I created 3 years ago now. But it's still a really useful way of teaching people all the different ways that misinformation can play out and give people examples. So here, fabricated content. This is a very easily constructed graphic that was shared widely on social networks, pretending to be a COVID-19 coronavirus rapid test kit. Of course it wasn't. This was just an old school scam. Uses the NHS logo, the National Health Service logo in the UK, to make you trust it. That is fabricated content. Manipulated content, and I apologize for this is hateful content, but I wanted to show how easy it is. And Harry said this, people don't know how Photoshop works. You show them these side by side and people are like, what? An 8-year-old could create this in 30 seconds. But look how it works as a way to push out harmful, misleading content very, very quickly. Again, using examples to teach people is critical. And false context, this is another easy way. This is the biggest type of information disorder we see. Here is a genuine image, but it is used out of context. It's a team won in Cleveland in 2016, so lots of people came out to celebrate. You take that same photo and say it's people outside during COVID. It's not. This is the cheapest, easiest form of manipulation. But again, if people aren't aware of it as a tactic, they're not necessarily looking out for it. And so finally, I'd say this, is that we need to stop muting our uncles. So you hear lots of people saying, oh, I'm so worried about the children. I am not worried about young people. They have grown up with filters on Instagram. They absolutely understand this world. I'm more concerned about my mum or my auntie or my uncle. And so this is a great piece in The Atlantic. When your family spreads misinformation, it is very tempting to basically ignore your uncle when they post consistently conspiracies or misleading content in your family WhatsApp group. But actually, we have a responsibility to talk to one another about this. And so here's the scenario. If your uncle shares something in your family WhatsApp group and you reply, no, actually, uncle, you're wrong. And here's a fact-checking article from Mafindo that shows that you're wrong. You have publicly embarrassed your uncle because your uncle's identity is connected to the information that he has shared. So rather than saying, oh, thanks very much, Claire, that's very useful, let me change my mind on that, your uncle is going to double down in his beliefs, and you've actually started to create more division. So instead, the scenario should be, well, uncle, I saw that you shared that on the WhatsApp group. So interesting. I've seen a number of other people share this. And I know right now we're all looking for answers, and I know I am as well. But I'm just really worried that some of this information is being shared to divide us, to divide our family, to divide our communities. And I'm just really worried that, you know, some of the tactics and techniques I'm seeing play out, you know, understandably, we're all looking for answers, but I don't think this is it. And I'd love to talk more with you about this because it is something that I'm really worried about, and we all want to get to the bottom of this. So rather than using language of you're wrong, I'm right, you're using language of we, us, community, neighborhood, family. And this is all about empathy. And it's exactly what David was talking about this morning, which is how do we have these peer-to-peer conversations? How are we empathetic? How do we recognize that people have these belief structures and work within them? I was so excited to hear him talk about that this morning, because I think this is how we have to move. I think we've had 4 years of emphasizing we need more facts. Yes, of course, we need to have a public record of accurate information. But if we don't recognize that as humans, we are emotional beings, and unfortunately, we are susceptible, particularly when we're frightened. And a global pandemic means that absolutely everybody on this planet is frightened right now. And in this moment, our critical thinking skills that are never particularly good are almost non-existent. And so for me, that's what we really have to think about. So in conclusion, I'm still a big fan of the internet. It's still amazing. It still does wonderful things every single day. But the flip side to having access to all of this information is we are more likely to be misinformed. We are more likely to share with each other information that does real world harm. And instead, we have to think about, and I do think the drink driving analogy is an important one. You know, 20 years ago, if somebody was at a party and they were drunk, you would go, oh, I hope you get home safe. Now you would take their car keys away from them because there has been a community response to the dangers of drink driving. And I think that with information, we have to hold each other to account, but in an empathetic way to say, if we don't get this under control, we will have real world harms. And we don't want the internet to go away. We don't want more regulation. We don't want an end of press freedom, as Harry so eloquently said. So how do we as a society take responsibility for the situation that we're in right now? So I'm excited to take questions with Harry, who's my hero. And so, yes, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can have a conversation.